Just like to say hello to everybody. I'm Kevin, and as Martin said, I've been with the team for about 4 weeks now, so I've had a steep learning curve. I'd just like to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you from wherever you are around the world, and thank you for joining our first ever product training. We're going to show you a demo of how you can use Codemagic, but first I'm just going to start with a few slides to show you what we do and just discuss a few items around Codemagic. So, Codemagic, if you don't already know, is a CI/CD for mobile app development. And CI/CD is a kind of buzzword these days, almost like the use of data science. You've probably read some blog post somewhere saying that everything you're doing is wrong and you should be redoing everything. Maybe that's the case, that you are indeed doing something wrong, but not necessarily. The idea of CI/CD is to give you feedback on your development practice by running tests and compiling apps in a clean virtual environment instead of on your local computer. This way, when it works on a CI, you can be sure that there are no local machine specific issues that will stop your teammates from building it, and you can catch errors before reaching production. What makes Codemagic special is that we are a fully managed service, which means you don't have to spend any time maintaining or upgrading servers or worrying about upgrading software like Xcode or the Android SDK. You can focus on building your product. Now on the slide here, this is the feedback loop for continuous integration. It's a cycle that gives you feedback without pushing the app into the stores and making sure that you can merge a pull request, for example. So your team will send their code into a repository, Codemagic will pick that up, run tests, try to build the app, and if there's any problems, you'll be able to see that something has failed, fix it, commit more code, and then go through the cycle again. Now on the other side here, we've got the continuous delivery part of the equation. So this is what automates the distribution process to the stores or other third-party services, so you don't have to manually handle code signing and publishing. And again, that can be seen as its own kind of feedback loop. As you're trying to publish to the stores, errors will be reported back. So we're getting reliable feedback throughout both sides of the process. So let's move on to the next slide. So we support building applications for both iOS and Android. So you can build iOS apps with Codemagic even if you don't have a Mac yourself. So if you're developing on Windows or Linux, you can use our service to get those apps built and distributed to the app stores. A lot of people know us for being CI/CD experts for Flutter applications, but you can also use Codemagic as a CI/CD for apps written in other languages, such as React Native, Ionic, Cordova, native iOS, native Android. In this actual demo, I'm going to show how to build a Swift application and publish it up to App Store Connect and TestFlight. So, who do we actually support in terms of people? Well, we support a whole range of different users, ranging from beginners, single developers, and small teams to large enterprise teams. And from the 10 years of experience that Codemagic has, they've seen that it's not that much different between a hobby project and building a large app in an enterprise team. The CI needs to handle everything. Obviously, there's some nuances between a small team and a large team, such as how the team collaborates, the resource and security requirements, but fundamentally, the functionality that's required is the same. As team scales up, we offer paid plans that allow your environment to be scaled up quickly and easily without any disruption to the service. We can add additional VMs easily, allowing you to run multiple builds in parallel. What about help and support? Well, if you're on a free plan, you can get community support via our Slack community. There's also access to the documentation, which you can access easily from the Codemagic interface. And I highly recommend going over to the Codemagic blog, where there's articles published on a regular basis on how to carry out different tasks within a CI/CD environment, such as how to use Firebase integration, how to build apps for Flutter and native iOS and Android. Lots of useful content there. And also, in terms of an enterprise user, we do offer dedicated business support where you get a dedicated support engineer to help you with any issues that you may have using the product. Right, let's have a look at the software itself. So I'm just going to close these slides down. I have had some problems sharing my whole screen today, so I will be switching between VS Code and Chrome, so hopefully that won't cause too many problems for you. So we can close this, and we're going to just log out of this environment here, and I'm going to take it from the top and show you how to get signed up if you haven't done so already. So you need to head over to codemagic.io, and from here, just click on the sign up button. You're going to have access to a GitHub, Bitbucket, or GitLab account to authenticate and join the service. And if you need any special, if you want to add any custom repositories after adding these, you can do that using an SSH connection. So this is what we call a custom source, and you can see that up at the top here. I'll just click in there quickly. We'll be able to provide a URL, say it's a private repository, and add some SSH keys, but that's not the topic we're going to discuss today. What we're going to be doing is just showing you how to build an application. So I've already got a Swift application that I've built in Xcode and pushed up to my GitHub repository, and Codemagic will show applications from my repository. So let's choose this one. Click the Setup Build option, and that will take us through to our Select Workflow screen. Now, as you can see, we've got workflows dedicated for Flutter and for other apps as well. The only real difference between the two is that for when we're building a Flutter app, you've got access to a UI. With the other application types, we use a configuration file, which is called codemagic.yaml, which allows us to programmatically or configure our workflows. You can use this workflow in the Flutter apps also. So as you become more familiar with the process, you may prefer to actually use the YAML file rather than the visual interface. And this gives you a lot of benefits. One being that you can check this into source control and keep track of changes, and other teammates can see what's happening with your changes that you make to your workflows. So let's just start with this template here. It's the iOS app. And the first thing we need to do to get going is to download an example template. So click on the download button here, and this will give us a YAML file. Now, I'm going to be just transferring this over to my project folder, which you can't see at the moment because I'm only sharing Chrome, but we'll be able to see it in a moment. Now I've moved it over. Let's just get rid of that. And let's have a look at this in VS Code. So I just need to share the correct application. Hopefully you'll be able to see this in a second. Right. I've moved the Codemagic file into the root of my Swift project. Now you can see here several entries, such as workflows and what they're called. So this one is simply called iOS app. I've got some environment variables which I need to fill in. And there's lots of things here, many options. And to actually work out what you need to do, the best piece of advice I can give to you is to follow this link here and read the documentation. Lots of helpful tips there. If you're using something like VS Code, you can just command click and then it will take you to the page on our site that explains. But I'm going to take you through some of the options and show you what we can do. So I'm going to start configuring a few things. So I don't want to use a workspace because I haven't got any CocoaPods files installed at the moment, any dependencies. So I'm just going to use a project. Mine's called Swiftly. And my scheme is also called Swiftly, so I'm going to just type that there in there as well. Xcode version can be configured here, so I'm just going to choose latest and CocoaPods default. I'm going to make a few changes here as well. So I'm going to change this to a project. I'm then going to change the reference to the environment variable here to a project. And then I want to call this Xcode proj. Okay, shouldn't need to change anything else on this line, just checking. And this should be enough to get us building an unsigned version of our iOS app. So let's give it a try. I'm going to save the changes. I'm just going to see that we've got changes being tracked in Git. I'm going to add the changed file, and then I'm going to commit the YAML file. And then I'm going to push that to the repository. Now at this point, I need to just switch back into sharing Chrome so we can see what's happened there. So let's go over to the screen we had before. And you should see here a button that says check for configuration file. So if we click on this now, we should get a nice green message saying we found a configuration file on our master branch. This means we can start building. So let's click on the build button. And you can see that it's picked up the name of the workflow. If you need to reload it for any reason, you can click on the reload button there and then click start new build. So what's happening here is that it's spinning up a new environment for us, and it's showing us a few details on the left-hand side, such as the branch we're working on, where it's getting its configuration from and what the workflow name is, how long it's taking, and what stage of the build we're at. So we've started the preparation, it's cloned the app, we're now at the build phase. So this should, provided I haven't made any typos in the YAML file, build without any problem. Now I don't want to actually manually kick off a build every time. That can be quite tiresome. So I want to start automating things. So let's head back into the Visual Studio environment and make some changes that will make our life a little bit easier. So I'm going to change the sharing back to VS Code. And I'm going to add a few items. So one of the things that you can do is add a build trigger event. So I'm going to cheat and copy paste some information in here, because I'm sure you don't want to watch me just typing. So let's just paste that in there. Now be aware that with YAML you need to be careful with your indentation. I've got a plugin installed to my VS Code environment that highlights any errors. So if the indentation is wrong, it will show us some nice red squiggly lines to tell me that there's a problem. So this is the first thing that I'm going to add in to the file. Now, in order to work with any build events, your source code repository needs to have a webhook enabled. Now, this is added automatically for Flutter projects, but with any other application type such as iOS and Android and React Native, for example, we just need to add this manually. There's a few pieces of information that you're going to need. First being the app ID. So we're going to head back over to Chrome and we're going to grab that from the build link. So if you look in the URL, you can see after this part here where it says app, there's a string of numbers, and we're going to copy that, and then we're going to go over to GitHub, and in my repository, so it's called Swifter, I'm going to click on settings, and I'm going to click on the webhook section, and I'm going to choose add webhook, and I'm just going to pop the ID here, and then I'm going to grab the URL that we need, because just like this, it's not going to work. So we need to just put a link to the Codemagic API, which is, or to hook, sorry, URL. We need to change the content type to application JSON, and we're just going to configure a couple of items here. So we need to make sure that pull request is enabled and pushes, and also make sure that you've got active enabled there as well, and then choose add webhook. So that should be all configured and ready to go. And when I now checking the updated YAML file. And as we can see, this previous build's got a nice green tick there and shows us some artifacts. One thing I forgot to show you was that as your build is proceeding, this is actually logging out in live time. So you can actually see what's happening. You can check for error messages. And it's probably a good idea to check this, you know, as you're getting familiar with the whole build system to see what a healthy log looks like. So that's just one recommendation that I would make. So let's check in the code. I'm not going to switch the view back to VS Code at the minute. I'm just going to go ahead and change it, check in the changes to the YAML file. So let's add that. I'm going to update it. And then I'm going to push it. Now, hopefully, all being well, once that push has come in, it should trigger a new build for us. So we'll see in a moment. Right, so you should be able to see there that the toast notification popped up and it started a new build. So let's have a look what happens here. So you can see that in this particular view, in the build overview screen, it shows us the commit number that it's building, the branch, and the name of the workflow that we're on. And you can see which stage of the build we're at. So if I just click back into that view and just show you the logs, again, they're being created in real time and you can follow those along to see what's happening. Okay, we're going to let that just continue and we're going to make some more changes, because what's going to happen in this build, hopefully, is that it's going to just complete. Well, the main thing was to show you that the build triggers will be there in place. So when we add some more code, it will automatically trigger them. What I want to do next is set up a signed build. So we've seen that we can do an unsigned iOS build. Let's go about adding some certificates and provisioning profiles that you're going to need in order to create your iOS builds. Now, one particularly useful thing that you're going to need is to encrypt your environment variables, especially if you want to put sensitive information. Perhaps you've got an open source repository. You don't want to be sharing sensitive information. Now, in order to create encrypted environment variables, we have a utility here where you can put your values in. So it could be your very secret password. And what will happen is it will not only encrypt this value, but also convert it to a base64 encoded string that we can then use in the YAML file. So if I encrypt the value, I can then click on the copy button here, and then I can paste it into the YAML file. Now, I don't want this particular value. I'm going to just copy paste some values that I prepared earlier. So let's switch back over into the view of Visual Studio Code. And then I'm going to grab the values that I require. So under this part here, where I've got my project and scheme, I'm just going to add in a few lines. Now I've got an encrypted value for my actual certificate that I'm using for my distribution. I've got its password, and I've also got the provisioning profile. In the previous view, I forgot to mention that not only can you type values in, but you can also drag files into that interface, such as your provisioning profile or perhaps a Google services.plist. If you're using Firebase integration, that's something that you'd need to actually use. So once we've got these in here, we need to start adding some scripts that are going to use them. So the first thing when we're signing an application, let me just save that. Let's just scroll down here, is we're going to initialize the keychain on the Mac machine that we're using for building. So you'll see in this section here, we've got scripts. So I'm going to just add in the first one, which is to initialize the keychain. Then the next one that we need is a script to set up our provisioning profiles. Here, it's just going to make a directory for us, which is this path here, and it's going to decode the provisioning profile variable you see here. So the provisioning profile will be put into the profile path. So the actual file will be put onto the file system. So the next thing we need to do is also take care of the signing certificate. So we're going to have to add those to our keychain. So again, another script. Now, scripts like this you could probably find in our documentation, especially if you looked at that link that we had at the top there. So they should be accessible to you as well. Now, this again is using the variables and decoding, as I probably just said. And the final thing that we probably want to do at this point is just make a modification to the actual build. So rather than using this Xcode build, we've got a couple of utility functions from the Codemagic CLI library that we're going to use to run the build. So let me just delete that line. Yeah, sorry, just checking that I hadn't deleted something important there. So again, we've got some red squigglies just indicating that my indentation is not correct. So this is just going to set up the profiles, and this is going to let us build a specific IP. Now, IPA, sorry. One thing that I'd like to change at this point is I don't want it to create a .app file. I want it to create an IPA file. So I'm going to just change this here. And at this point, I'm just going to check my builds are still working. So I think that's enough changes to make at this point. I've got my keychain initialized, the provisioning profiles and signing certificate, and it should create us an IPA. So let's just quickly add the file that we've changed, which is the YAML file, add a commit message, and then do a push. And again, that should hopefully trigger off a build. So let's just quickly pop into the Chrome view and have a look, see what's happening there. So it looks like we've got a build started. Click over to builds, and we've got it preparing. Now, hopefully that should be fine. So I'm going to have a little faith, and I'm just going to make a few more changes to the YAML file, which should be the final step. So my goal is to get this app published into TestFlight. Now, before we go there, let's have a look at TestFlight. So you can see here that I've been doing quite a few builds with this app to make sure everything works as I expect. At version number 26. Now, bear in mind when you're publishing to the App Store that you need to do a manual upload first. Now, I did that using Xcode. So I archived the application and then uploaded it. After that, I was using Codemagic to actually distribute all of these further builds. So in a real environment, you'd be able to hand these out to your test users and add test groups and distribute the app from here. So let's go back into VS Code. And this should just take us a couple more minutes, and hopefully we should be able to wrap up. So let's go over to Xcode. Sorry, Xcode, I mean VS Code, so apologies. So really, what we need to take care of here is a few things. We need to be aware of build versioning. So as you saw in the last screen, I think I was up to version 26. Codemagic gives your build a version as you go. So at the minute, I think we're on either version 3 or 4. So we're going to do a few things to make sure that we are creating a build version which is higher than the current version we have in TestFlight, because if I try to give it version 25, it will fail. So I need something that's either 26 or higher. So in VS Code, let's just add some information. So I'm going to say that we're on version 26, we're on build 3, so we want a difference of 23. So I'm just going to use this as a way to make sure that I've got a higher build. It's because we've started at a different phase than at the beginning. So then what I need to do is use the Xcode AGV tool to produce a higher build number, but that needs to be part of a script. So let's just add that in there. So what you can see here is we've got another script that says increment build number. It's going to take a Codemagic build number variable, which is available on the build machine. It's going to add 23 to it, and I'm just going to add another 1 or maybe 2 just to make sure that we're incrementing. Obviously, in a production environment, you'd do this correctly, but I just need to make sure that we can publish in the demo. And what we should do next is add some publishing information of where I actually want to send it to. So let's grab some information about my App Store Connect account. So we've got some red squiggly lines there, so that means we've got some alignment issues. So let's just bring this over here. So what we can see here is my Apple ID, username, and my encrypted password. That should be enough to get us connected to App Store Connect and start publishing. So I'm just going to check the build is finished that we started previously. And then I'm going to come back into here and then add that to my GitHub repository, push up those changes. So let's just look at here. Okay, so the main change to notice here is that we've successfully created an IPA file and we've got additional artifacts. Now, it's always important to keep your build history and artifacts, so things like your ProGuard maps and your obfuscation symbols. So if you have any crashes in your apps, you'll be able to monitor the stack traces effectively with that information. So we keep all those artifacts from all your builds. So very important to have a history so you can go back in time and have a look at what artifacts are on each of those builds. Okay, so I'm just going to go and check in those changes that I've made. So just so you can see what I'm doing, I'll switch the view back to VS Code and just make sure I've got everything I need there. And I think this should be the final steps that we need to take. So let's just add everything, commit, and then push. So this time we're going to watch the build and see if we've made any mistakes during the publishing and build phase. All right, so hopefully we've got a new build. Oh, sorry, I clicked the wrong button there. All right. Take a sip of water. Okay, so let's just expand out this section. And we can see that it's doing its code signing part here, and passed in some information.
Now we just need to hope everything goes well in the final step.
Fingers crossed.
I think one thing was that when you're doing the publishing to App Store, I think it might be possible to, once you created the app there, then you can actually use Codemagic to do the initial publishing as well.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've managed to get some artifacts successfully, so we're still okay at that point. We're now moving on to the publishing section. So the only real problems I've ever seen here is when I put a build number which is too low. So that's why I was just trying to make sure that we get a build number which is big enough. If it isn't, it will just give us a message here, and then we can go back to our code, sort it out, and then check that back in and correct the problem. So what else have we got there? Okay, we'll just keep on that view for the moment.
I think one thing to note is also that you can install our CLI tools locally. So some of the things that Kevin's testing on the Codemagic web app, you can actually test on your local machine as well. And all the scripts that we're using, those are available in our documentation. The dreaded publishing.
Yeah.
And that's it for today. And then we'll come back on the next episode to see if the publishing succeeded or not.
Yeah, I think it time stands still when you're looking at it.
Yeah, I think it's like a cliffhanger you can leave right now.
Ah, look at this. This is what I was hoping would happen. We'd get a nice green build finished message, no errors, and hopefully now if we go into the App Store Connect, it's probably going to be 28 or 29. Let's see when I refresh the view. My maths isn't too great. So, and what it should show us, hopefully, is the new build, and then it's processing it, and that's going to take a while just for it to be ready to distribute. Okay, so we've got build 28. It's processing it. It's successfully uploaded that new build, and then obviously from there you can go and distribute to your testers. So basically, to summarize what we've done today is we've used the Codemagic configuration YAML file, which can be used not only for building iOS apps using Swift, but also for Flutter. Which is very important because a lot of people are obviously using Flutter, may not be aware of the YAML file and the power that and flexibility that it gives you for building your apps. We've looked at automatic build triggering. We've looked at using environment variables. We've looked at using scripts, and in this particular case, we've used the scripts for setting up provisioning profiles, managing the signing certificate, and then also incrementing the build number. We looked at using or generating different artifacts and discussed the importance of keeping your artifacts for future requirements if you need to debug a stack trace, for example. And then finally, we set up our publishing, and in this case we set up a connection to the App Store Connect and published it directly into TestFlight. So hopefully that's given you some idea of what we can do using CI/CD. Now obviously there's more. You can create multiple workflows, you can add in your testing, which is obviously a critical part of CI, running a test script. And obviously if it fails, the build would indicate that, flag it up to you so you can correct those problems. So obviously there's unit tests in a Swift app, which I could have run. In a Flutter app, you've got the same unit tests, widget tests, driver tests, so on and so forth. So the sky's the limit really with adding and configuring. And obviously with a workflow, you may want to set up different branches, a branch for development only, and then a branch for your release where you would only trigger it if you merge or have a pull request that goes into that branch to push it out to the App Store, for example. The assets can be distributed to different sources, as we discussed at the beginning. So it may be that you want to upload it to Amazon S3, for example. It could be that you're using an enterprise in-house app, which doesn't necessarily need to go to an app store. So Codemagic can take care of all these sort of requirements that you may have.